You ready for myth is personal truth? Myth is a way of taking an abstract thought and unifying it into a common language. In a larger perspective, each of you are light that came from an abstract thought. To put that into an understanding is going to require a myth to explain it. Since you came from an abstract thought, you've had to have a way of explaining yourselves and realizing what you were. This is where a portion of myth comes from. In the larger scheme of things, your universe was created out of a principle you don't understand. Since you don't understand it, you have to make stories about its explanation. These stories are what you call myth. In your common language, most of you consider myth to be totally fictitious or to be an untruth. Myth is not necessarily fiction or untruth. It is a modeling or a metaphor to explain reality. The only thing that all of you have in common are your experiences. If you do not have common experiences, you cannot talk to one another in common language. Your myths are a way of taking universal or common experiences and putting them into a unified language so that you can all share. Everything that you live in this reality is a myth, simply because what you are living, experiencing, or believing is actually a representation of something else. All of your religious structures are a myth. They are a myth trying to explain creation, reality, a way of life. Your science is a myth because it is taking the components that it understands and tries to create a story out of them. It does not understand the entirety of any given situation. None of you here do as of yet. You take bits and pieces, and as you take a piece, you try to make a story about where it came from. Let's take a story about one of your natural elements. Your rain comes from the sky, so to speak. Eons ago, individuals saw the rain coming from the heavens and thought God was crying. All they knew is they had a tangible thing they could touch, which was the rain, which was abstract to them. They didn't know what caused it. They didn't know where it came from, so that kept it in the abstract. For their own minds, they created their myths or stories of the creation of rain, that it came from a crying God. You do likewise to everything in your reality. Your psyches cannot handle not understanding what is going on. One of your main priorities in coming here was to write, so to speak, an explanation of how you work, why you work, and how you do it. Your psyche was created to write this explanation. When you start doing anything in your life, your psyche automatically has to have a reason for it, because that is part of its programming. It begins to make stories or myths about your life to tell you what your reality is. All of you are in the process of living different realities and experiences. It makes it quite difficult to talk common language. People throughout time and history have come onto your planet to try to create unified myth or a unified reality. They have tried to make a common language with which everyone could communicate. Most of these are what you now call religions. In any given organization or in any given situation, the participants have a unified theory of how they agree to view reality. For example, your creationists believe that the earth and this whole reality was created by a god and that it just happened. Scientists see that as quite ludicrous, and so they try to find an explanation down to the minute detail of how it was created. You have your creationists and your evolutionists. Each of them weave and create their myth or their own story about reality. All along the way, they find new pieces of it. Your psyches were created to deal with new input, but they really don't like it. They are much like individuals who go to work, but don't really like what they're doing. Your psyche is the same way. Your psyches always seek to find a unified ideal or idea so that it can cease its expansion. It always likes to take the path of least resistance, which will often be to go into an organized philosophy, system of dogma, or religion. The traditional organized religious thought creation, for example, was done one way, and there aren't any ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is how it was created, and don't ask questions. The psyche feels quite secure and safe with this. It knows that it isn't as simple as it sounds, and it knows there is much more detail to it, but it is willing to just take that and use it. Your psyches like to have something that does not clutter them. They like being told, here is what it is. Take it, use it, and don't ask questions. From a larger perspective, your science is actually what is evolving because it is willing to ask more questions. When you are willing to ask questions, you open up yourself and your psyche to a greater understanding, and you expand your myth. Your science was just not satisfied with the mainstream religions, so it created its own religion of trying to find the answers within the cellular structure and within matter. Both science and religion are creating a myth. They are creating a story, a philosophy, a belief about reality, how life was created, how it exists, what it came from, and where it is going. The myths they create are ultimately a simplification or an incomplete story of how things actually are. Many individuals can stay in one philosophy and one system of belief and never be bored with it their whole life. Their psyche is so rigid, compressed, and so tight in that belief system that unless it is fractured, split, or altered, it is not going to find boredom with it. It will find that it has a sense of security, a sense of peace that is there, and it will not give that up. It becomes stronger and stronger with time. When the psyche begins to be pushed, then it begins to look for a new myth to create stability. Your journeys in life actually lend to a movement or fracturing or expanding of the psyche. Whenever the psyche becomes disturbed, the psyche will then begin to seek out an explanation for its disturbance. It will seek out a new myth. The way the psyche becomes disturbed and seeks to create a new myth is when your reality presses against the belief you've bought into. Let's say that you are in an organized system of belief or religious structure which does not allow you to act in certain mannerisms or behaviors. Since that is its belief system, you've spent a lot of your life not acting in those mannerisms. You've built an immediate guilt response around it, or you've built up a belief system that says this is taboo and we do not do this. Then one day you find yourself in a forbidden situation and the psyche does not understand it. The psyche thought it knew the myth. The psyche thought it knew the totality of your reality and understood it. Now you bring in a new experience which actually goes against it or challenges the psyche's positioning. When it challenges its positioning, the psyche begins to seek out an excuse or reason for your new behavior and feelings. It will try to either put you back in the old myth through guilt, or it will try to take the old myth and expand it into a new philosophy. The psyche says, well, we have to make an exception here, and it begins to find some loopholes in the existing myth or the existing belief system in order to allow you to expand in the way you really wish to be. The myth is the creative portion of reality. An abstract idea comes in as a feeling tone, and from that feeling tone, you actually use your mind to be creative with it in order to explain a whole story. Your myth, or the way you live life, is actually a very creative principle. This is where your creative potential comes from at this point in your journey. Whatever your perspective is at any given moment is your current truth. What your truth is today will be expanded tomorrow, the next day, and the next. What your truth is 10 years from now will be different from your truth today. It might have some of the same components, or it might have deleted some of them. It might have completely altered and changed, but your myth is your constant ongoing story. It is what you take with you out of this reality. It is your way of explaining something that you have no other way of explaining. Let's say that you took a religious organization that had 10,000 members in it. Every one of those 10,000 people would have a different view of God. Their views might be similar in a generic way because of the premise or the belief system that is holding the organization together. But each of them will view God and all the components in the religion slightly differently. Each of their individual truths about God would be different. You cannot say that your truth is the only truth. Your truth is your truth, but each individual's truth is their truth too. Truth is basically your view of reality at any given moment. In other words, when you were 5 years old, your truth might have been mud pies and toys, and you might not have ever comprehended driving a car. You might not have comprehended going to the moon. You might not have comprehended the career that you have now chosen for yourself. At 5 years old, these things were not a portion of your view of reality. So as you evolve and expand in your consciousness, the horizon widens. As the horizon widens, you begin to see new truth. You begin to see new ways of looking at things. You begin to see things that you never saw before. Your planet is going to move to a place of unified myth. This has happened in smaller perspectives. Religions have tried to unify the myth. Your ancient Greeks, Romans, and even your ancient Egyptians, each in their own way, had their own myths or a unified way of looking at life. Science today is creating a unified myth by trying to create a perspective of how to look at life. Each of these are very legitimate in their own way, but what you actually need on this planet is one unified myth that pulls them all together and allows everyone to live their own creative truth at any given time. If you could move into a unified myth or unified view of reality, all of you would see your own intricate place in it. It would not move it into a place of one unified religion. That is not what it would do. Each individual with the scientific bent would be able to have that reconciled with every other aspect of reality. An individual with a religious bent would understand why they are in a religious bent and the purpose it is serving. You as a people would understand your angers. You would understand your frustrations, and it would lead to a place where you would not have the warrings you have with each other. Now, when I suggest a unified myth or unified system of reality upon this planet, you may think, well, good, that will be my truth, and everybody will live life the way I see it. That is not what this means. It means that each individual will have an intricate place, and that place will be very well respected. It will be understood what archetypal forms they are dealing with, what myths they are dealing with, and the biology of the body they are dealing with at any given time. There would be allowances made for each individual, and it would not create the states of disturbance that you now have upon this planet. Once again, myth does not mean it is fictitious. It does not mean that it is an untruth. It is just a way of explaining what you are going through, what your life is, and what it is all about when it is so abstract that you don't understand it to begin with. To be able to live here and even begin to fathom any of these experiences, you have to have some form of story to put it all into. It is much like playing a game where somebody gives you a couple of letters of a word and you fill in the rest. You all enjoy this type of game. In the abstract, it is the same. You fill in your understanding of life with myth. The myth is creation, it is creativity, it is your life. It is the fun thing that you came here to learn how to do. Taking the components of it and weaving your own story is called life, and it makes each of you individual and unique.